Picture a man, a Vice-Admiral of the British Royal Navy, a man who had navigated storms, commanded warships, held the lives of hundreds in his hands, a man trained in evidence, in precision, in the cold logic of fact, a man who believed for most of his life that when you died, you simply ceased. His name was William Usborne Moore, and in 1904, something happened to him that would change everything he thought he knew. He was attending a séance in New York, skeptically, critically, when a materialized form stepped out of the darkness toward him, moving with a gait he recognized instantly. She took his hands in hers, and she whispered, "I am so glad you have come." It was someone he had loved, someone who had died 37 years before. Moore went home that night and did what a naval officer does. He documented everything. Then he went back, and kept going back. For 7 years, across 2 continents, through scores of investigations, until he had accumulated something almost no one in history has assembled, a meticulous, sworn, cross-corroborated record of evidence that is truly impossible to ignore. Evidence that includes information that no living person could possibly have known. Evidence confirmed by one of the world's greatest scientists. Evidence that the dead are not dead at all. He published it in 1911. He called it Glimpses of the Next State. And this is that story. Welcome to Whispers of Hope. Before we begin, later in this video, there will be 2 secret tests by Moore. Tests he believed no living person could have faked. Let us be clear about who we are dealing with. Vice-Admiral William Usborne Moore was not a naive man. He was not grieving when he began. He openly declared that he started as an agnostic, someone who believed that human consciousness simply dissolved at death. He was by profession a skeptic. He brought that skepticism with him into every séance room. He changed conditions, he tested, he doubted, he exposed frauds, and he still concluded, after 7 years, that what he was witnessing could not be explained by any natural means. But to understand why the evidence matters, you need to understand who Iola was. Moore never gives her real name in his book. He calls her Iola, a name used to protect her privacy. She had died 37 years before he began his investigations. 37 years. And yet, she had never quite left him. December 1904, New York City. Moore had sailed from Southampton, England on the 17th, alone, telling almost no one where he was going or why. On Christmas Day, the same evening he docked, he attended a materialization séance at a brownstone on West 38th Street. The medium was a man named DeWitt Hofe, a stranger. 7 people sat in the room. None of them knew Moore or anything about him. Moore had only been in the country for a matter of hours. The light was extinguished. They sat in darkness for 30 minutes. Then a small lamp was lit, shaded blue, just enough to see by. And the cabinet curtain opened. A form emerged, small, slight, below average height, moving with a gait he recognized. Another medium present called out Iola's Earth name, her real name, and then the form turned toward Moore. She walked the length of the room, 10 feet, toward him. She took both of his hands in hers. She drew him gently back toward the cabinet. She was in what Moore described as a state of intense vibration, as if the effort of being present was costing her everything. "Have you any message?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "I will write." She took a pencil. She knelt on the floor and began to write on paper laid on a small table. Then she paused, rose, retreated behind the curtain as if needing to gather strength, came back, finished the message, placed it in his hands. Then she came and knelt beside him at his seat, and she whispered, Moore held both of her hands in his. He noted everything, because that is who he was. The height, 5 feet 1 inch, correct. The build, slight, correct. The feet, very small, correct. The hands, those of a woman, a little larger than he remembered, but the hands of a woman. The medium, DeWitt Howe, stood 5 feet 7 and was broadly built. No kneeling, no costume, no trick of light could have transformed him into this. And then she rose slowly, withdrew to the cabinet, and said, "God bless you," and was gone. Moore went home to his lodgings that night. He sat down at a desk. He wrote it all down. And then he booked another séance. She came to him again, and again, 3 times across separate sittings. Each time, when a stranger mistakenly stepped forward, she vanished. She would only come to him. Here is what makes the Iola evidence so extraordinary. She did not appear only once through one medium in one city. She followed him. Across 7 years of investigation, Iola communicated through Mrs. Riot in Toledo, through Mrs. Henderson in Boston, through Howe in New York, through Mrs. Pepper in public séances attended by strangers, through mediums who had never met each other in cities hundreds of miles apart. Each time the presence was consistent, the personality was consistent, the knowledge was consistent. She knew things about his domestic life that no medium could have researched. She knew the arrangement of objects in his private rooms. She knew his wife by name, and picked her photograph from a stack of strangers twice without hesitation. By 1911, Moore had returned to England, but he continued sitting with Mrs. Etta Wright, a medium from the US who had come to England at the invitation of researchers. Moore devised a private test. The evening before a sitting, he arranged 3 photographs of Iola on the bureau in his room. One showed her holding a letter. He placed this on the right. One showed her holding a hat. He placed this in the center. One showed her in a crinoline dress. He placed this on the left. He told no one. He left the room and went to bed. The following morning at the sitting, he asked his spirit companion, the independent voice speaking directly in the room through Mrs. Reed, what was on the bureau in his room. She described all 3 photographs correctly, by position, by what was held in each image, in order. Let that settle for a moment. This was a spontaneous test, devised privately without anyone knowing, and yet every detail was correctly answered without hesitation by a voice speaking independently in the room, not through the medium's lips. And then she added something Moore had almost forgotten. 2 small bronze horses on the table beside the photographs. He had placed them there days ago and barely registered them. She had not. She had been in his room, alone, looking at her own portraits, and she had remembered every detail. Moore was not content with personal conviction. He wanted proof that could not be dismissed. Before leaving England for one of his American investigations, he visited Sir William Crookes, Fellow of the Royal Society, discoverer of the element thallium, one of the most rigorous scientific minds of his generation. Crookes had spent years investigating mediumship himself. He knew how easily evidence could be faked, so he suggested a test. Moore was to purchase a bottle of ink. He was to secretly dissolve lithium citrate, a rare mineral, into it. He was to keep the bottle sealed and on his person at all times. He would tell no one. And if, during a sitting, spirit writing appeared between sealed slates that Moore himself was holding, writing that supposedly came from no human hand, he was to cut out that writing and send it back to Crookes in London. Crookes would burn it in a spectroscope. If lithium was present in the flame, the writing contained the ink from Moore's sealed secret bottle. And if the writing contained that ink, It had been written by something that had access to a bottle Moore never let out of his possession. Moore did exactly this. He bought the ink in Southsea, England. He dissolved the lithium. He sealed the bottle. He told no one on either continent. And in sitting after sitting, letters appeared between his sealed slates, written in a hand he could not identify, on subjects he had not spoken of, with knowledge he had not shared. He posted the cuttings to Sir William Crookes in London. Crookes placed them in the spectroscope and wrote back, The blank paper from the same sheet showed no lithium. Moore's own handwriting on the envelope showed no lithium. Only the spirit-produced letters, written between sealed slates by no visible hand, in a locked room, contained the mineral from Moore's private, secret, sealed bottle. Someone had written those words, and that someone had access to ink that no living person knew existed. Of everything Moore investigated, perhaps nothing unsettled and comforted him more than what is known as the direct voice. Not a medium speaking in trance, not a whisper relayed through someone else's lips. A voice, the voice of somebody in spirit, independent, in the open air of the room, speaking for itself. Mrs. Etta Wright was, in Moore's own words, the most gifted medium he encountered in 7 years of research. She did not enter a trance. She sat calmly in the circle, heard everything that was said, and was, by her own account, as curious about the voices as anyone else in the room. And what struck Moore most was not the strangeness of it. It was the opposite. It was how ordinary it all sounded. Moore wrote that the naturalness of what went on was perhaps the feature that impressed him most of all. These were not solemn pronouncements from beyond the veil. They were people, still being exactly who they had always been. Moore described it like this in his own words. And then the singing familiar songs, whistling little airs, and calling old nicknames are often used to bring to the sitter's conviction of identity. These were not actors performing the idea of a soul. These were people, being people. They were not pretending to be alive. They simply still were. And that, Moore came to believe, was the whole point of it. Not to frighten, not to instruct, just to be recognized, just to say, it's still me. Now let us sit with what we have just heard. A Vice-Admiral of the Royal Navy, a man formed by the sea, where your life depends on getting facts right, where no amount of hope makes a reef disappear. He began as a skeptic. He investigated like a scientist. He documented like a lawyer. And after 7 years of careful, sworn, cross-corroborated investigation, he concluded that death is not the end. What you have heard tonight is only a handful of the cases Moore recorded. His book contains more than 100 documented incidents gathered across years of investigation, involving different mediums, different witnesses, different countries, and different forms of evidence. To include them all would take far more than a single evening. Here is what Admiral Moore wrote in his own words. He did not reach this conclusion through faith. He reached it through evidence, through a lithium test confirmed by one of the greatest scientists of his era, through a woman who described the arrangement of photographs in his private room, a room she had never physically entered. Iola, whoever she was in life, did not survive as a faint signal. She did not survive as an impression, a residue, an echo of what she had been. She survived as herself. She worried about Moore's wife and said so. She knelt on the floor of a seance room in New York City and whispered 4 words that told him everything he needed to hear. And the voices Moore heard were no different. An uncle, still losing his train of thought. An old shipmate, still worried about his language. A spirit, still impatient to be understood. The person you love is still who they always were, continuing, somewhere close, as themselves. Moore, writing from his study in South Sea, a decorated naval officer with no reason to court ridicule, put it this way: that is not a platitude. That is the conclusion of a man who tested it. He tested it the way sailors test the sea, by going in. For 7 years he crossed oceans, examined mediums, tested voices, writings, and witnesses, and he came back with this: death is a mere incident, a door to a higher life. They are not gone. They are just ahead of you, waiting, with love that does not expire. Thank you for watching. If this has brought you some peace today, please share it with someone who needs it. See you in the next one.